Donald Trump has made a declaration saying anybody that does illegal protests will quickly be deported. But what is an illegal protest? Is there such a thing as illegal protests, and do they exist? The answer is no. There is no such thing as an illegal protest. In fact, according to a constitutional law expert, the First Amendment explicitly protects the right of peaceable assembly. In fact, President Donald Trump has made headlines recently for threatening to stop federal funding for any college, school, or university that allows illegal protests. However, there is no such thing as an illegal protest, according to an expert on constitutional law who teaches at Washington University, which is in St. Louis. The First Amendment explicitly protects the right of peaceable assembly. Trump's threat should chill and enrage anyone who cares about the First Amendment. A protest is a public assembly that seeks to send a message about some political issue, he says. A public assembly of any kind may become unlawful if law enforcement determines that the assembly threatens public order. First Amendment protection for the right of peaceable assembly means that law enforcement can't declare an assembly unlawful without an exceptionally strong reason. Moreover, the First Amendment absolutely prohibits law enforcement from declaring an assembly unlawful because of the assembly's message. Because, for example, an assembly happens to be a protest. Shutting down a protest because of its message would blatantly violate the freedom of speech. Trump has also threatened to imprison, deport, or expel agitators. So what is an agitator? Well, the category of agitator that Trump threatens with the government's wrath is even more absurd, according to the expert. Agitator is not a legal term of art. Basically, an agitator is generally someone who makes noise, disrupts the status quo, and calls attention to a cause. In other words, agitation is a form of free speech. Trump is literally threatening to imprison, deport, and expel people for speaking. Why would Trump deem a protest illegal? Presumably because the protest expresses a view to which Trump objects, most obviously of a criticism of himself. This, after all, is the same president who wants courts to weaken the First Amendment doctrine that protects us from civil liability for criticizing government officials. The First Amendment's most important function is to protect criticism of government officials and policies. If we abandon that protection, then our rights of free speech and peaceable assembly mean nothing. Trump has declared war on the First Amendment. Anyone who cares about constitutional democracy must stand ready to fight for our rights. And a while back, I did a podcast about Thomas Jefferson and the First Amendment and why it was so important. And our forefathers were very, very smart and knew that when they were long gone, that this would become an issue. However, back then, it was a very big issue because the colonists were speaking out against the king, against the British rule of tyranny that they didn't like, and went to war over to become independent. And the king had decided that anybody who speaks bad against the king, against Britain, or him, would be branded a traitor and arrested for treason. And Thomas Jefferson knew that this was a problem. He knew that it couldn't stand. So when he wrote the Declaration of Independence, he made it a point to say on the First Amendment that yes, as a citizen, you have a right to express your views and your opinions without being worried that it's going to get you into trouble. And the First Amendment he was very specific And it was very, very clear. In fact, at the Continental Congress, this was something that they discussed profusely, because they were asking the question is, how far can your free speech be? How far can freedom of the press go? And it was a question to this day that's still being answered. Free speech within reason, but what does that mean? I don't know. Do you? Obviously, the obvious answer, the most obvious one is, you can't incite violence. Your free speech is entitled, but not if it's going to incite violence. Not if it's calling for someone to be killed, or if it's going to get people killed. So when Donald Trump was saying illegal protest, what he's basically saying is, you can't have a protest if it's going to be about me. You can't have a protest if it's going to make someone else look bad. You can't have a protest if it's going to incite violence. And so, but there's no such thing as an illegal protest, because protests, as we saw, are protected by the First Amendment rights. However, that being said, protesting can become illegal when it becomes violent. A protester or group becomes violent. Anyone who commits an act of violence against another person, destroys, vandalizes property, or engages in other illegal acts can be arrested, which will turn into a riot, basically. So according to the Freedom Forum, when this protest becomes illegal, as I said, protest leaders or speakers can be held accountable when they intentionally incite others to immediate violence. When they intentionally incite others to immediate violence, vandalism, or harassment, even when expressing a protected idea or view. The Supreme Court ruled in the 1969 case, Brandenburg versus Ohio, that free speech protection extends until the moment it incites or is intended to incite imminent lawless action. In 1973, the court reinforced in Hess versus Indiana the imminent violence test set out in Brandenburg. It overturned the conviction of a demonstrator whose speech, the court said, was nothing more than advocacy of illegal action at some indefinite future time. And protesting becomes illegal when it moves into places closed to protest. For instance, if you move from a public space onto private property, say a car dealership or a store parking lot, without permission from the property owner. Some states, including California and New Jersey, provide limited protection for protests in private spaces, usually open to the public, such as shopping centers. A lawful demonstration moves from a public space into a restricted area, such as a military base or other secure government buildings or installations. Demonstrators violate various court-established protest bubble zones litigated through the years around abortion and healthcare facilities or places of worship. Also, the Freedom Act of Access to Clinic Entrances Act of 1994 makes it illegal to harm, threaten, or interfere with an individual obtaining or providing reproductive health services or damage a facility because such facility provides reproductive health services. A new Trump administration order now instructs federal prosecutors to enforce the law only in extraordinary circumstances or in instances when death, extreme bodily harm, or significant property damage result. In other words, protesting can also become illegal and becomes unsafe, such as when there's a clear and present interest in public safety, such as when demonstrators expand from a public sidewalk onto the lanes of a busy highway. An otherwise lawful protest violates health or sanitation regulations, such as long-term occupation of a public campus space or a public access beach that has no sanitary facilities. Protesting can become illegal when it violates other legitimate limits on protests that are unrelated to the message the protesters are sending, such as marching at 3 a.m. through a residential area or making loud speeches near a hospital. When protesters violate temporary specific curfews that can be justified to protect public safety, to prevent theft involving property or imminent violence. Authorities may disband a protest or other protected demonstration activity if they have good reason to believe a violence is imminent or when the activity has failed to obtain or observe permit conditions. Which is, again, so you have a permit to protest. Now, to get the permit, you have to specify what kind of a protest is going to be and where your radius is going. In other words, where is my protest? What is the location of the protest? Where are my barriers? Where does the protest end? Is it a specific location, or are we going to be marching from point A to point B, which is, the steps of Congress or the steps of the embassy? What day do you want to have the protest? What time of the day do you want the protest? How long is the protest going to be? These are the conditions. And if the city is going to grant you the protest, then they have it on file that this is what was agreed upon. Anything other than that is violating the conditions of the permit and can turn to illegal. And that's why you have cops that permit, to make sure they are followed to what was agreed upon. Permit, and which goes to my next thing. Permits for marches, demonstrations, or protests may set certain requirements or limits, as I said. Time of the day, the route it's taking, the amount you're paying for the permit, the size of the group, but the approval for a permit must not be based on the content or views expressed, and permit requirements or fees cannot be used to discourage the activity. Is what I said. So you're getting a permit, it's like having a parade. You cannot close a street illegally. If you're going to have a parade, say down Fifth Avenue, you're going to have a permit, and the police are going to be putting up signs saying roads are going to be closed on this day. It's like doing a movie shoot. Okay? You cannot close a road. You cannot go into Central Park, put down film equipment, have a big crowd there, and start filming. And putting signs, you might be on camera if you walk through here, or you can't tell people, I'm sorry, you can't come here because we're filming, if you don't have a permit. There is a reason why, when you're filming on a location, you have the police there. And there's a reason why there's a movie and TV union in the police department, and yes, that's actually true. Because they're making sure that you're following the rules of the permit and that you're out by the agreed upon time. So if I'm renting my house to a film crew, I'm going to sign a contract that you have to have a hard out, which means if I'm telling you you can shoot in my house, but you can only shoot from like 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., that's agreed upon. That means I can come back to my house at 4 p.m., and if I still see you filming at 4 p.m., I could fine you. I could say, okay, now you're trespassing on my house because you're going past what we agreed upon, which means you violated the terms of our permit agreement. You violated the terms of our contract, which is legally binding, and so now I can sue you, or I can fine you. So it's very important that you understand what's in the permit. What does the permit say? So it's very important. If your permit says we're going to have 50 people, and suddenly you have 3,000 people showing up, that means now you're violating specific things in your permit because your permit said it's going to be on this, it's going to this route with this amount of people, but now you have 150 people joining the route. Can you extend the permit? Probably. Permits may be used when the protected activity takes place in a public space intended for other specific purposes, such as national parks or the National Mall. The guidelines of the National Park Service says a permit is required for any group larger than 25 people, and certain protest activities may be limited to specific areas within the parks. And in fact, if you go to nps.gov, there's a link there about how to apply for a permit. It gives you the link on how to apply for a permit for the National Mall and Memorial Parks. Our permit specialists will contact you for additional meetings, discussions, the documents are required, and continue to walk you through the permit process. A permit is issued prior to holding the First Amendment activity in the park. All demonstrations are deemed granted, subject to all limitations and restrictions applicable to said park areas, unless denied within 24 hours. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but it's going to list you the things to know before applying, locations, and location-specific requirements. In this instance, for this conversation, let's just go with the fact that it's actually listing here that if you want to protest by the Lincoln Memorial, it's above the white marble steps, Thomas Jefferson Memorial area enclosed by the outermost columns. The World War II Memorial will be in front of the Freedom Wall, extended to the western edge of the Rainbow Pool, and the contemplative bench located on the north side of the memorial. The National Mall and Memorial Parks are open to demonstrations at all park locations with the exception of restricted areas. Activities may only occur within these areas on unspecified dates to maintain the contemplative and respectful environment of the memorial. Restricted areas are identified in the Code of Federal Regulations. So it's basically telling you where. But go to mps.gov. You can go to mps.gov and you get all the information over there. Many states do have laws criminalizing the wearing of a mask during a protest or march or other public activity, generally adopted decades earlier in response to the Ku Klux Klan activity. Such laws vary by state and must be rooted in the prevention of harassment or intimidation. I don't know which states they are, so you have to look. Some states revised those laws during the COVID-19 outbreak to allow masks in public for health reasons, but according to CNN and NBC News reported in 2024 that many states are considering eliminating that exception post-pandemic. So I'm not going to really go through this entire list, but the point of the matter is that protests are, there is no such thing as an illegal protest unless for the reasons I mentioned. There are 4 types of protests: demonstrations, strikes, civil disobedience, and riots are all specific examples of protest. Okay. What countries are protesting illegal? Currently, prominent violators of these freedoms include, I'm not surprised, but it's Russia, Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Belarus, and Russian-occupied Crimea, and Russian separatist occupied territories of eastern Ukraine, which doesn't surprise me at all, because these are countries that are communist, ruled by dictatorships, and you have no freedoms over there, so that doesn't surprise me. Can you have guns at a protest? 36 states either explicitly allow concealed and or open carry at rallies or don't forbid guns in that setting. Again, do activists... What are violent protests called? A riot or a mob violence is a form of a civil disorder commonly characterized by a group lashing out in a violent public disturbance. That is an illegal protest. Having a riot. If a peaceful protest turns violent, then it becomes illegal. And yes, you could start arresting people, shutting down the protest, and whatnot. But a peaceful protest isn't illegal. Or is activism protests? They're social activists. Some activists are employed by non-profit organizations, commonly community groups and political campaigns, and they receive a salary just for their work. Can you be fired for protesting? Well, according to California Labor Code, it disallows employees from firing or threatening to fire employees for participating in any particular course of political action. California Labor Code more generally protects employees from being demoted or discharged for lawful conduct. What is an unlawful right? So what is the U.S. First Amendment right? Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. What this means is Thomas Jefferson was very specific on this. What he's basically saying is the people have a right to assemble and protest and lay out what is on their mind and bring it up to a representative, to Congress, or to their senator, to their congressman, or to their clergy. And First Amendment says right here that you have the right to free speech, you have the right to press, and you have the right to assemble peacefully, and you have the right to petition to the government for a redress of grievances, aka you have a right to go to your government and give a list of grievances that you have a problem with and that you want to bring to action. You have that right. And Donald Trump is taking that away, saying, no, you don't. I am the press, I am the law. That's what he told the governor of Maine. He said to the governor of Maine, I am the law. No, you're not. You are not the law. You don't make the laws. Congress makes the laws. Because if Congress doesn't if you make the laws, then we don't need a Congress. So, what are the 5 forms of nonviolent protests? Well, public speeches, letters of opposition or support, declarations of organizations and institutions, declarations of incitement and intention, signed public statements, group or mass petitions, slogans, characters and symbols, banners, posters, and displayed communications are all forms of protests. And the world's biggest protest that actually made the Guinness Book of World Records took place in Europe. It was in Rome and involved around 3 million people and is listed in the 2004 Guinness Book of World Records as the largest anti-war rally in history. Madrid hosted the second largest rally with more than 1.5 million people protesting against the invasion of Iraq. In what country, in which of the following can be protested? Contract awards, solicitation, cancellations. You can also protest alcohol license applications, unemployment benefit claims, property tax assessments can also be protested. But where are protests illegal? Well, in some countries that are censored. You have a lot of countries that are censored. And these are Burma, North Korea, Turkmenistan, Equatorial Guinea, whatever that is, Libya, Eritrea, whatever that is, Cuba, Uzbekistan, Syria, and Belarus. Citizens of these countries are virtually isolated by authoritarian rulers who see open access to information as a threat to their rule. And if you notice, Donald Trump is implying the same thing. Donald Trump is trying to censor the media. Donald Trump is trying to censor free speech because he sees it as a threat to him. Because he sees it as people trying to take away his power. But it also sees him as a narcissist. So, we can see here that illegal protests is not a thing. We see it's not a thing. Can you be banned from protesting? Well, the right to protest is internationally recognized, but police have move-on powers, and protesters may end up under arrest and in detention. Protesters may end up under arrest and in detention. Repeated confrontations can lead police to apply for exclusion orders and preventing a particular person engaging. Can the government fire you for hate speech? Well, that's a good question. Contrary to a common misconception, most expression one might identify as hate speech is protected by the First Amendment and cannot lawfully be censored, punished, or unduly burdened by the government, including public colleges and universities. This is important because of what Donald Trump is doing to the student with a green card and a student visa and attending Columbia University. There is no hate. The Supreme Court of the United States has repeatedly rejected government attempts to prohibit or punish hate speech. Instead, the court has come to identify within the First Amendment a broader guarantee of freedom for the thought that we hate, as Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes described the concept in a 1929 dissent. In a 2011 ruling, Chief Justice John Roberts described our national commitment to protecting hate speech in order to preserve a robust democratic dialogue. He said, and I quote, "Speech is powerful. It can stir people to action, move them to tears of both joy and sorrow, and, as it did here, inflict great pain. On the facts before us, we cannot react to that pain by punishing the speaker. As a nation, we have chosen a different course to protect even hurtful speech on public issues, to ensure that we do not stifle a public debate. In other words, the First Amendment recognizes that the government cannot regulate hate speech without inevitably silencing the dissent and dialogue that democracy requires. Instead, we as citizens possess the power to most effectively answer hateful speech, whether through debate, protest, questioning, laughter, silence, or simply walking away. As Justice Louis Brandeis put it, the framers of the Bill of Rights believed that freedom to think as you will and to speak as you think are means indispensable to the discovery and spread of political truth, that without free speech, an assembly discussion would be futile, that with them, discussion affords ordinarily adequate protection against the dissemination of noxious doctrine, that the greatest menace to freedom is in the inert people, that public discussion is a political duty, and that this should be a fundamental principle of the American government. Justice Brandeis argued that our nation's founders believed that prohibiting evil counsels would, what today we might call hate speech, would backfire. They recognize, he quotes, they recognized the risks to which all human institutions are subject, but they knew that order cannot be secured merely through fear of punishment for its infraction, that it is hazardous to discourage thought, hope, and imagination, that fear breeds oppression and hate, that hate menaces stable government, that the path of safety lies in the opportunity to discuss freely supposed grievances and propose remedies, and that the fitting remedy for evil counsels is good ones. Believing in the power of reason as applied through public discussion, they eschewed silence coerced by law, the argument of force in its worst form. Recognizing the occasional tyrannies of governing majorities, they amended the Constitution so that the free speech and assembly should be guaranteed. Banning hate speech without restricting political speech is prohibitively difficult because of the target's inherent subjectivity. Each American, all but certainly, has a different understanding of exactly what expression should lose First Amendment protection as hate speech. One citizen's hateful screed is another's religious text. One citizen's slur is another term of endearment, or as the court put it, one man's vulgarity is another's lyric. As a result, crafting a generally applicable definition of hate speech is all but impossible without silencing someone's legitimate speech. Conceptions of what constitutes hate do not remain stable over time, as ideas gain or its acceptance, political movements advance or recede, and social commitments strengthen or erode notions of what is unacceptably hateful charged to. Contrary to another misconception, the First Amendment's protection is not absolute. The Supreme Court has identified narrow exceptions to the First Amendment, including but not limited to speech that constitutes unlawful incitement, true threats, intimidation, or discriminatory harassment. Some of these carefully defined exceptions encompass speech that one might identify as hate speech. So is hate speech legal? Most of the time, yes, with a few narrow exceptions. So, there is no general First Amendment exception allowing the government to punish hate speech that degenerates people based on their identity. Things we call hate speech might occasionally fall into an existing First Amendment exception. A racist speech might seek to incite imminent violence against a group or might be reasonably interpreted as an immediate threat to do harm. But hate speech, like other ugly types of speech we despise, is broadly protected. Defining hate speech is not just difficult, it's impossible, as evident from the vastly different situations. So, a protest is, in the sense, is relevant as a usually organized public demonstration of disapproval of some law, policy, idea, or state affairs, while a riot is a disturbance of the peace created by an assemblage of usually 3 or more people acting with a common purpose and in a violent. So how does the government define the difference between a protest and a riot? As I said, a protest is usually an organized public demonstration for a disapproval of some law, policy, idea, or state of affairs, while a riot is a disturbance of the peace created by an assemblage of usually 3 or more people acting with a common purpose and in a violent and tumultuous manner to the terror of the public. And that is the definition by Webster's Dictionary of Law. And yes, that is a thing. The term protest as used above is not formally defined in the U.S. Code, but the Federal Anti-Riot Act of 1968 defines the term riot in part as a public disturbance involving an act or acts of violence by 1 or more persons. Part of the assemblage of 3 or more persons which act or acts shall constitute a clear and present danger of or shall result in damage or injury to the property of any or other person in the person of any other individual. So basically, protests are this. Basically, there's no such thing as an illegal protest. However, what type of protestings are illegal? As I said, when it becomes violent. Anyone who commits an act of violence, destroys property, destroys or vandalizes property, engages in illegal acts, can be arrested. Are peaceful protests legal? Yes. Peaceful protests are legal in the United States. The First Amendment protects the right to peacefully assemble and express views through protests. The right to protest applies to all people, including international visitors. The right to protest is strongest in traditional public forums like streets, sidewalks, and parks. The government can't restrict speech on private property without the owner's consent, which means Columbia University is private property, and therefore what Donald Trump is doing, he's doing without asking Columbia University permission first. Columbia University is supposed to handle it without government interference, not be threatened with their funding being taken away. However, that being said, government restrictions, police can place reasonable restrictions on speech rights. Some jurisdictions require permits for marches or rallies. Local traffic rules will apply no matter what, may apply no matter what. Police can intervene if there's a threat to safety. Police should only intervene if there's a threat to safety or rights, if it's necessary, and authorities should make spaces safer by communicating with organizers and providing services. Meaning, when you're when you're wanting to protest, communicate with your organizers exactly what the intention is, and offer to provide services to help the protest be smooth. Before sending a protest, you can prepare for safety by staying in touch with others and planning for escalation. You can also check. And according to the ACLU, the protesters' rights are basically according to the ACLU, remember, the American Civil Liberties says the First Amendment protects your rights to assemble and express your views through protest. However, However, police and other government officials are allowed to place certain restrictions on the exercise of speech rights. So make sure you know your rights before you head out into the streets. Remember that. According to the ACLU, you have the right to protest, you have the right to assemble, and you have the right to express your views through a protest. And the government is allowed to place certain restrictions on that. So, what about free speech activity on private property? The general rule is that the owners of private properties may set rules limiting your free speech. If you disobey the property owner's rules, they can order you off their property and have you arrested for trespassing if you do not comply, which is what we saw last year at the colleges. When the colleges they ordered the tents to be removed, and they weren't removed, the police were called in. When they were told to leave the premises, or the students that were protesting could be punished, the police were called in. So again, according to the ACLU, you should know your rights for demonstrating. Can my free speech be restricted because of what I say, even if it is controversial? No. The First Amendment prohibits restrictions based on the content of speech. However, this does not mean that the Constitution completely protects all types of free speech activity. Police and government officials are allowed to place certain non-discriminatory and narrowly drawn time, place, and manner restrictions on the exercise of their First Amendment rights. Any such restrictions must apply to all speech regardless of its point of view. Where can I engage in the free speech activity? Anywhere, generally. In traditional public forums, such as streets, sidewalks, parks. In addition, your speech activity may be permitted to take place at all the public locations that the government's opened up to similar speech activities, such as plazas in the front of government buildings. What about on private property? The owner, as I said, owners of private properties may set rules limiting your free speech. If you disobey the property owner's rules, they can order you off the property and have you arrested for trespassing if you do not comply. And we did see that last year. When the protests started getting out of hand, the colleges said you have 24 hours to remove your tents and your camping gear, or face expulsion, or face arrest. And when they didn't comply, that's exactly what happened at Columbia University. The cops were called in, they broke the windows, and they had people arrested. Everything was done by the book. So yes, you have a right, but they also have a right to give you the right to get off the premises if you do not comply. Do I need a permit before I engage? No. However, certain types of events do require permits. Generally, these events are a march or parade, does not stay on the sidewalk, and other events that require blocking traffic or street closure. A large rally requiring the use of sound amplifying devices, or a rally at certain designated parks. Many permit procedures require that the application be filled several weeks in advance of the event. However, the First Amendment prohibits such an advance notice requirement from being used to prevent rallies or demonstrations that are rapid responses. Also, many permit ordinances give a lot of discretion to the police or city officials to impose conditions on the streets, such as the route of a march or the sound levels of amplification equipment. Such restrictions may violate the First Amendment if they are necessary for traffic controls or public safety, or if they interfere significantly with effective communication with the intended audience. A permit cannot be denied because the event is controversial or will express unpopular views. So, there you go. If organized have not obtained a permit, where can a march take place? If marchers stay on the sidewalks and obey traffic and pedestrian signals, their activity is constitutionally protected even without a permit. Marchers may be required to allow enough space on the sidewalk for normal pedestrian traffic. May I distribute leaflets and other literature on public sidewalks? Yes, you may approach pedestrians on public sidewalks with leaflets, newspapers, petitions, and solicitations for donations without a permit. Tables may also be set up on sidewalks for these purposes if sufficient room is left for pedestrians to pass. These types of free speech activities are legal as long as entrances to buildings are not blocked and passersby are not physically and maliciously detained. However, a permit may be required to set up a table. Do I have a right to picket on public sidewalks? Yes, and this is also an activity for which a permit is not required. However, picketing must be done in an orderly, non-disruptive fashion so that pedestrians can pass by and entrances buildings unsigned. Can government impose a financial charge on exercising free speech rights? Some, yes. Security deposits for cleanup or charges to cover overtime police costs. Does it matter if other speech activities are taking place at the same location? Yes. The government cannot discriminate against activities because of the controversial content of the message. Therefore, if you can show that similar events to yours have been permitted in the past, such as a Veterans or Memorial Day parade, then that is an indication that the government is involved in selective enforcement if they are not granting you a permit. What other types of free speech activity are constitutionally protected? Well, that's a lot. Music, theater, film, dance. The Constitution also protects actions that symbolically express a viewpoint. Examples of these symbolic forms of speech include wearing masks and costumes or holding a candlelight vigil. However, symbolic acts and civil disobedience that involve illegal conduct may be outside the realm of constitutional protections and can sometimes lead to arrest and conviction. Therefore, while sitting in a road may be expressing a political opinion, the act of blocking traffic may lead to criminal punishment. What should I do if my rights are being violated by a police officer? It really does any good to argue with a street patrol officer. Ask to a supervisor and explain your position to him or her. Point out that you are not disrupting anyone else's activity and that the First Amendment protects your actions. If you do not obey an officer, however, you might be arrested and taken from the scene. You should not be convicted if a court concludes that your First Amendment rights have been violated. And so there you have it. There you have it. Protesting is legal. As I proved, there's no such thing as an illegal protest. And protesting became legal in 1969. A case the U.S. Supreme Court decided in 1969, Shuttlesworth versus Birmingham, arose from the civil rights movement. The case both protected the right to protest and allowed limited restrictions. One of the court's holdings is that any licensing requirement for free expression in publicly owned places is unconstitutional if not narrowly defined and objectively applied. In a 1989 Supreme Court decision, Ward v. Rock against racism further established this standard. Here we go. Well, hold on. Governments can't deny a person's constitutional right to protest peacefully. However, the government may regulate the time, place, and manner in which a protest happens. A 1989 Supreme Court decision, Ward v. Rock against racism, further established this standard. The case challenged the constitutionality of New York City's noise ordinance. The issue was Rock against racism concerts in Central Park. The court held that noise-related restrictions are constitutional as long as any restriction of time, place, and manner is content neutral, meaning the content of the speech or expression may not factor into the permitting decision. Is narrowly tailored to serve a significant government interest such as public safety and order. Leaves open ample. The court has also held that requiring getting a permit in advance for a peaceful protest is unconstitutional. This includes protests that may block traffic or roadways. For example, protesters risk arrest if they block a roadway they have not obtained a permit for. Extra requirements for assemblies conducted near major public events are also permissible. In these situations, the city may require protest organizers. And here we go. The SBN, the series of the crackdowns on peaceful protests and other forms of dissent have shown up throughout U.S. history. These shape laws and attest to Constitution's limits. The Alien and Sedition Acts of 1798, which is something Trump likes to use, for example, were passed in preparation for war with France. The acts were intended to silence dissent. And that's something that Trump loves to use every time he's protesting, every time he wants to bring up protesting. The series of legislation restricted speech critical of the government. Among other provisions, the Espionage Act of 1970 and the Sedition Act of 1918 followed. They similarly restricted speech critical of the government or war. These are things that Donald Trump has been using to justify his points. And these laws are very outdated. Following the terrorist attacks of September 11th of 2001, the Secret Service expanded the use of free speech zones during presidential appearances. These zones are at least 500 feet from the president. They are often enclosed behind fences and cordoned off. Sometimes the zones potentially limit protesters' ability to express. Violations can result in trespassing, disorderly conduct, disturbing the peace, and other similar charges. Free speech zones are also put use at the national conventions of both the Democratic and Republican parties. They were used on college campuses in the 60s and 70s, and some campuses continue to enforce them today. Free speech zones and other. So, to be fair, in short, there's no such thing as an illegal protest. So when Donald Trump is saying illegal protesters will be arrested, he's making that up out of thin air. There is no such thing as illegal protesting, as I've just proved. And in fact, Donald Trump only made this worse because protesters are now protesting. Because protesters are protesting the demand that they release the Palestinian activist Mohammed Khalil, as the judge has blocked deportation. As Donald Trump says, his arrest will be the first of many. Rallies are planned for today, Tuesday, in at least 2 major cities, as protesters continue to demand the release of Palestinian activist Mohammed Khalil. A Free Mohammed Khalil walkout was scheduled to take place at 11:30 at Columbia University, New York City, but as a person with knowledge of this issue said, efforts made to take. Now, it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon here, so this has already happened. A march is planned in Washington Square Park. Another rally is planned for 5:30 at Federal Plaza in Chicago. Protester Khalil, a Columbia graduate, was arrested Saturday at his apartment by federal immigration rights, who told him that his student visa was being revoked. His attorney said he's being held at an immigration detention facility in Louisiana. His lawyer, Amy Greer, said immigration and customs enforcement agents were told that Khalil has a green card and is a permanent resident, but he was arrested anyway. On Monday, United States District Judge Jesse M. Furman temporarily blocked Khalil from being deported, saying he would remain in the United States as the court weighs challenges to arrest and planned deportation. A Homeland Security spokesman says his arrest was in coordination with ICE and the State Department in support of Trump's executive orders prohibiting anti-Semitism, and because Khalil led activities aligned to Hamas, a designated terrorist organization. However, as usual, Trump and his administration did not provide evidence of those allegations. Last spring, he helped organize protests at the University about the war in Gaza between Israel and Hamas. Again, illegal protest. Trump said on Truth Social that Khalil's arrest was the first of many to come. In a post on Sunday, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that the administration would revoke the visas and green cards of Hamas supporters in America so they can be deported. Which is illegal, by the way, because just because you're a supporter of Hamas doesn't give you the right to take away someone's green card. Because if I support a Muslim, if I'm a Muslim supporter, I'm an American citizen. I was born in America, and I'm an American citizen. So if I support Hamas, are you going to deport me? Are you going to ban me a traitor? Are you going to have me arrested? What would you do if an American citizen says they support Hamas or they support Muslims? What do you do then? There are plenty of Americans who support Hamas. There are plenty of Americans who support Gaza. There are many Americans who support terrorism. What would you do? How would you do with them? You're singling out one group because you're racist and you're bigoted and you're filled with hate, and you're singling out one group of anti-Semitism. What about anti-Muslim? What about anti-black? Why not them? Why are you singling out anti-Semitism? If Jews attack Muslims, are you going to punish the Jews? If Muslims attack Jews, are you going to punish Muslims? If a black person, if the Muslims attack, if black people attack Palestinians, are you going to punish them? Why are you singling out a specific group? Greer said the comments made by Trump and government officials shows the illegality of Khalid's arrest. He was chosen as an example to stifle entirely lawful dissent in violation of the First Amendment. While tomorrow or thereafter the government may cite the law process that toothpaste is one of the tubes and irreversibly so, the government's objective is as transparent as it is unlawful, and our role as his lawyer is to ensure it does not prevail. Hundreds of protesters rallied Monday at Federal Plaza, Manhattan, with some holding signs that read, "Release Mohammed Khalil." One protester said the arrest was an attack on free speech, which is true. It is getting ridiculous. Greer said she talked to Khalil and he was in good spirits and appreciative of the support. His wife, who was 8 months pregnant, pleaded to have him by her side before she birth of a baby. For everyone reading this, I urge you to see Muhammad through my eyes as a loving husband and the future father to our baby, she said in a statement released by the lawyer. She called him a rock and said everyone who has met him can attest to his incredible character, humbleness, selflessness, and his love for helping others. I need your help to bring Muhammad home, so he is here beside me, holding my hand in the living room as we welcome our first child into this world. So as you see, protesting is legal. And as you can see, it's having a domino effect because it's having the opposite effect that Donald Trump is intending it to do. His illegal arrest is only causing more protests, more rallies, causing more protests and rallies in support of Khalid. Because, as I just proved, there is no such thing as an illegal protest. Khalid committed no crime. His First Amendment rights is being violated. This is simply because Donald Trump is filled with hate. Donald Trump is filled with bigotry and racism. And he's trying to make an example. He's trying to have the power. He's trying to show that he's making America great again by getting rid of bad people. But he's also trying to get away from, he's also trying to think that people are stupid. And when you tell people protests aren't illegal, they're going to use the term, he supports Hamas. Which is making, not America great, but making America divisive. Because people believe what Trump says. And I've proven in this podcast that there's no such thing as an illegal protest. So if people are going to attack you by saying you're a liar and you're a snowflake, and yes, protests are illegal, and then you ask them to prove it, they won't be able to. Because all you have to do is do a simple Google search, right? Is there such a thing as an illegal protest? Is there such a thing as an illegal protest? And you see here, the answer is no. Protesting is legal. And I've pointed out, point by point, in the First Amendment. And Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, John Adams, but Thomas Jefferson mostly, knew that this would be attacked. He knew that over time, things would change. He didn't write the First Amendment because of him, because they wanted a country, so they need to set some rules. He wrote the First Amendment. The Constitution is what framed this country. It's the same thing. Every country has it. Most countries have a constitution that they live by. The United Kingdom, England has the Magna Carta. When they had the separation between church and state, they made the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta is their constitution. In fact, you can see a copy of the Magna Carta at the British Museum. And it's right there. The United States has the United States Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence, Articles of Confederation. It's right there, in black and white. And so the framers of this country knew that people would try to interpret free speech or the First Amendment for their own purposes. Donald Trump never read the Constitution. I'm willing to give anybody $1,000 if they can prove to me that Donald Trump read the Constitution or knows what's even in it. Because I can guarantee you, if he knew what was in the Constitution, he wouldn't be saying stupid crap like anybody doing illegal protests will be arrested. Because there is no such thing as illegal protests. They do not exist. And I pointed it out point blank here. So I challenge anybody to tell me I'm wrong. I challenge anybody to prove to me that there is such a thing as illegal protests when I proved that there's no such thing. Because I laid it out as clear as it is daytime outside. I have proven. I challenge you to prove me wrong. And if you can prove me wrong, I will give you $100 to your Zelle or Venmo or whatever. If you can prove me wrong. But I can guarantee you, you can look and look and look and you won't find anything. And that is the point. And that's why I will go back to always saying facts matter. Because when you throw out things that someone says, but they don't provide any evidence to the contrary, but you believe it anyway, and then try to justify it by showing sources that aren't legit or credible, then there's no reason to believe you. Because unless the source you're showing me is a credible source, and I don't mean YouTube or TikTok, which MAGA loves to do, it's not credible. Show me a credible source to prove me wrong. And if all you can do is attack me and curse me and call me out with names, or not just me, anybody, then I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. And if you're gonna call me a fag, at least spell it correctly. If you're gonna call me a fag and spell it P-H-A-G, and you intend to call me stupid, well, who's the stupid one? You're spelling the word fag, P-H-A-G. And fag is spelled F-A-G. But I'm the stupid one. And that's okay. And that is okay. Call me stupid. Call me a liberal snowflake. Call me a Democrat. Tell me I hate Trump. Hating Trump has nothing to do with anything I said. Because what I'm saying is law. What I'm saying is fact. As Mark Twain said, get the facts straight and then distort them as much as you like. But you can't change facts, and you can't change history, no matter how many times you're trying to rewrite it. January 6th happened. Fact. You cannot change that. You cannot rewrite that to say it was a walk in the park. Fact. I know MAGA's trying to do that. I know a lot of Republicans are trying to do that. But it happened. The world saw it happen. That's a fact. You can't call the January 6th political prisoners because they're not. You can't call them hostages because that's not what a hostage is anyway. And they're not political prisoners because they weren't. Donald Trump can't call them political prisoners because he doesn't know what the term political prisoner, because it's not the right term. He doesn't know what the term political prisoner is. You can't call them hostages because they're not hostages, and calling them hostages is an insult to the actual Israeli hostages who were taken hostage on October 7th. It's an insult to them. And it's an insult to many Jews also. So no matter how many times you try to rewrite history, you can't. You can't say Donald Trump is a convicted felon because Joe Biden made it so, because that makes absolutely no sense. You can't say he wasn't impeached because the Republicans said they weren't. No, they had a trial. He was impeached. Unfortunately, the Republicans were controlling the House, and they didn't want to agree to impeach. They were still impeached. You can't change history. That is a fact. So, protests are illegal. Hate speech is illegal. I suggest you read the Constitution before you comment. Next time you want to call me out, educate yourself. Please go back to school. Read the Constitution. It's important. Know your laws. When Donald Trump says something, try to second guess him. See if it's true. Because Donald Trump is a stupid man. He's ignorant. He's a stupid monkey. And he really has no business being in the White House. He's a narcissist. He's evil. He's bigot. He's racist. He hates everybody. And that's just it. There's no such thing as illegal protests. He's not allowed to do what he's doing, and that's it. You don't have to believe me, but it's true. And if you want to understand it very much, I suggest you educate yourselves. You read the Constitution. You read all about it, and then comment. Don't attack people without knowing and comment. Don't attack people because you don't like to hear the truth. The truth hurts, yes. And sometimes we have to hear things we don't want to hear, even if it hurts us. And at some point, and again, this goes back to a lot of things I said earlier in podcasts. You don't have to agree with me. I know people who listen to my podcast think I'm stupid and think I'm anti-America, anti-Trump, and everything because they're in a cult. And as long as you're in a cult, you believe one person and one person only, and that's the master and leader of the cult. And until people wake up, I will continue doing these podcasts because it's important. It's important to set the record straight. It's important for people to actually know the laws. It's important for people to actually know the facts, what the facts are, what the reality is, and what's not. Because if people believe what Donald Trump says, it's going to tear this country apart because a civil war will break out due to misinformation, due to misunderstandings, and due to the hatred that one person has. And I, for one, don't want to live through that. I, for one, want to inform people and let them know what's right. I pointed it out, plain and simple, and that's what you do to educate people. You can go with it or not. But the fact of the matter is, protests are perfectly legal. They always have been, and they always will be. And nothing you say or do can change that unless you tear up a constitution.